Hi, everybody. So, this is really going to be fun. We are here to talk about a movie called Big Trouble in Little China. And this is, I guess you'd say, sort of a campy action classic. And my friend AJ is here to talk about it with me.
Hello.
Yeah. So, is this a film that you kind of grew up seeing?
It
Or
is not actually like I kind of have an interesting story behind this. Like when I was in in junior high and high school, that was when I was first starting to get into film, I guess.
Mhm.
And I would go on IMDb and just look up directors that I liked or that I thought were interesting. And I would just go through their whole filmographies. And this is one of the films I discovered that way while I was going through John Carpenter's filmography. Because I've
Mm.
always been a horror fan. That's kind of where he made his name for himself. And I
Yeah.
thought, that looks interesting. That's that poster caught my eye.
Mm. Yeah, I'd heard about this movie, but I had never seen it. I thought that this was also like, I guess I thought this was sort of more Chinese than it was. That sort of surprised me that it was. I thought it was like set in China. I mean, I knew nothing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this might be the first John Carpenter film I've actually seen. Believe it or not, because I'm
Oh wow.
a horror girl. And so, yeah, it's sort of interesting. I mean, I think that you could see little elements, would you say, of sort of a little inspiration, a horror inspiration in here, would you say?
Yeah. Especially in the monsters that show up throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And well, I'm sure we'll talk more about those, but those almost seem like he's just trying to make an allusion to the fact that he's a horror director because they don't really fit into the story spectacularly well. I
Right.
don't think. But
Right.
yeah, we'll get to
Yeah.
that.
Cool. Yeah. So, so this movie is it's sort of built as a fantasy martial arts comedy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Okay, so the film opens with Jack Burton, played by Kurt Russell. He is a truck driver, and we don't know what company he works for or anything. He drives a semi truck that he calls a Pork Chop Express, which is painted on the side of it. And he's very much, he fancies himself to be a macho man, I guess you would say. Um, he's very blustery. He's kind of a blowhard when you hear
Yes.
about him. He loves his CB radio. It's kind of like podcasting before podcasting in a way. The way he uses the CB radio to kind of dispense his quote unquote insightful look at the world. And he comes into San Francisco. He comes into Chinatown, and he meets up with his friend named Wang, who is played by Dennis Dunn, I think.
Hmm.
I can't remember all the actors and who played who, but they're gambling one night. They gamble all night, actually. And in the morning, um, Wang tells Jack that he's going to go pick up his new bride at the airport that morning. She's from China and she has green eyes. And he makes a really big point about that because there's not very many Chinese women who have green eyes or Chinese people who have green eyes, you know. And
Hmm.
so and so they go to the airport to pick her up and she is kidnapped by a gang who who Chinatown is her turf basically. She's kidnapped and while they're there they meet up with a journalist who works Chinatown kind of unofficially named Gracie Law, played by Kim Cattrall. And she's there with a friend of hers, I guess. I don't know. They don't really go down that down that road too much,
Hmm.
anyway, so obviously Wang wants to help, wants to rescue his bride, and so they pursue the gang into this alley where they find this other where they're cut off by this other gang. Basically, they're having a funeral for one of their members, and they are confronted by a rival gang, and they get into this battle that they witness. But it's cut off when these three mystical figures show up, called the three storms. There's I don't know. Each of them have their own mystical powers, and they basically break up the fight. And as Jack and Wang are trying to escape, they encounter kind of the head of these mystical figures named David Lopan. They said they don't know that it's him yet. They just know that he vanishes when Jack almost hits him with a truck. And all of a sudden he's there at the back of the truck. They drive through him, basically. And so Jack naturally has questions about all this. And so Wang takes him to meet his uncle, I think. That's also not clear. There's a lot of things that aren't clear in this movie because it moves so quickly. But that's when you find out.
Yeah, it's kind of the, once they get sort of the introductions out of the way, I feel like it's just sort of a, almost like similar to Labyrinth in the sense there's just sort of, they're in one confined space, there's a bad guy, and there's sort of one obstacle after another obstacle after another obstacle after another obstacle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically it. That's where Gracie and Wang and his uncle, they all kind of tell Jack about David Lopan, who's this big crime boss in Chinatown that everybody's afraid of, and that he has this big network underneath Chinatown. Or wait, they don't. Never mind. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. They don't know it's underneath Chinatown, but they know where his operation is, where he works out of. And so they team up to go infiltrate Lopan's network and rescue Wang's bride. And that's basically where anything that you could synopsize easily ends.
Yeah. So what's your overall thoughts, reaction to rewatching the movie?
I think I like it a lot. I think I liked it more when I first saw it when I was a teenager, because it seems like a movie that was kind of made for teenagers when you watch it, you know. But I still like it a lot. I think Kurt Russell's really fun to watch throughout the movie. It's kind of a interesting character. Not really it's someone that you would see a lot of stars play, I think, is kind of a character.
Yeah.
And then I also really like the fast pace and the action. And you see a lot of things that you would not see in any other movie, and things that you wouldn't see put together in any other movie.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. It's not a typical movie that I would gravitate toward. I'm not that big a fantasy person. I'm not that big martial arts kind of person, but it was different and it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I think that the biggest thing that makes this movie a success is Kurt Russell. This is just one of those movies that just lives and breathes on the back of its star. And everybody else is fine, but fairly unmemorable. But he is this movie.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting. This movie was originally written to be a Western when its script was first. The first draft, it was going to be Jack Burton was going to be this cowboy, kind of this John Wayne figure who rides into San Francisco in the 1890s or something, and his horse is stolen instead of his truck by the crime boss. And I think you can kind of see that still in Kurt Russell's character and his portrayal.
Do you know what made them change it?
Oh yeah, the writer thought that we're already throwing a bunch of really weird random stuff at the audience in this movie. Having it also be a period piece and having the having the audience get used to that would be too much for this particular story. So
they were still going to have the monsters and
everything else was going to be the same. I said it was going to be a Western.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting. It makes sense why you'd hire Kurt Russell then. He has that sort of outlaw with the heart of gold kind of feel.
Yeah. And I think you can really see him kind of channeling John Wayne throughout the movie. There's even some parts where he even sounds like John Wayne in the way he reads some of his lines. Things like that.
Yeah, he definitely does. And he just sort of owns the screen the way that John Wayne always did.
Yeah.
And he manages to take a character that could be unlikable, that's kind of an anti-hero type, and make him very, very likable and funny. And you have to have charisma in order to pull that off.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. And the reason why I kind of mentioned that I think it's kind of a brave role for him to play is that he's not really playing John Wayne the way John Wayne would play himself. John Wayne was always this really competent, tough guy, who always knew what to do. Kurt Russell's kind of playing Jack Burton. Like, what if John Wayne was a buffoon and didn't really know what to do in a lot of situations, but he acted like he did, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Or like, yeah, he acts. That's very true. He acts like he's very confident, and yet, and then some of the best comedies. That's what you get is characters that are completely 100% confident, but they're completely horrible at what they're doing, and
Yeah,
that's always really funny.
yeah, and I think like the moments that stand out to me the most when I think about his character is there's a moment where he's handed a gun by someone who he's with, like an Uzi, and he starts to fire it, but he doesn't, but it's not working, and he doesn't understand like what's going on here. And they tell him, "Hey, you still got your safety on there,"
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they have to teach him how to take the safety off before. It's just things like that, and then yeah, exactly. He's not confident, but he likes to act like he is.
Well, and it's weird because so there's talk of them doing a remake of this movie with The Rock, which The Rock
Uh-huh.
does, I think, have the charisma to pull it off, I think. But man, there's so many elements of this movie that I feel like would be very wouldn't be PC now. And I just wonder how the heck you would pull it off. You know, you have a mail order bride, basically. You have, or arranged bride at least. You have the Kim Cattrall character getting abducted and they're just going to be sold as a sex slave. You have some little awkward depictions of the Chinese, it could be a little
Yeah,
not great. And I like it's in a way it's kind of refreshing because it's not a safe movie. It's just kind of out there, but it just makes me wonder like how they would possibly sort of make it modern.
yeah, that is interesting. And I was thinking about that when we chose to watch this movie. I was like, this will be interesting to see how people react to this
Yeah.
one, or what people think of it now. And it's interesting, like you mentioned Wang's bride, a Chinese woman who's kidnapped. She does almost literally nothing through the course of the movie. She is just a damsel in distress.
Yeah.
At least Kim Cattrall is intelligent. If a little bit, she's a little bit ditzy at points, and sometimes she does some things that are questionable, And she is kidnapped, but she is intelligent at least.
Mm-hmm.
And she does have things to do throughout the course of the movie.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and most of there is his friend Wang, but most of the Chinese characters are they're almost like stormtroopers. They're just sort of there to like,
Yeah,
you know. But I don't know. What do you think of Wang as a character?
I liked him a lot. Like Kurt Russell and John Carpenter have both said that Jack Burton's not really the action hero of this movie. Wang is the action hero. Like in any other movie, Wang would be the lead character and not Jack. And I
Right.
could see that a lot watching it this time around because Wang is really the one who knows what's going on. He's the one that's competent enough to fight off what's going on, except for one significant scene at the end where Kurt Russell kind of gets to show off a little bit. And yeah, like I said, in any other movie, he would be the star of the movie. And I don't think he has enough unique personality traits, I guess, to make him truly memorable. But he's good when you're watching it, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it has like a certain degree of sort of nostalgia, I guess, about it, where you had like the Lone Ranger and Tonto. You have Britt Reed and Kato from Green Hornet, like these kind of sort of combinations that are kind of similar to this. I feel like.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I think actually John Carpenter specifically mentioned things like that, and he said I kind of wanted to turn that on its head, especially the Green Hornet and Kato kind of
Mm-hmm.
situation. Just kind of switch, I guess, the nationalities around. I don't know.
Well, because I think that the Green Hornet is very similar, so I'm curious to when I wonder why he thought he was switching around because you have a Chinese character that's Bruce Lee. Hello, he's the the one that can fight, where the lead character's kind of incompetent. And so that's what made me think of it right away, is that you have the assistant who's the real like talented fighter.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's just solely a case of like the nationalities when he was talking at that particular moment. Like, I think when they were making the movie, they were just focused more on the archetypes of this is the action hero and this is the sidekick. Well, let's make the sidekick the main focus of the movie. The person who we see the movie through their eyes, basically.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. So, what do you think of the Lo Pan?
I think he's an interesting character. He's kind of a unique villain in a way. Like I would expect him to be. I don't want to say he's down to earth, because he's definitely not down to earth in a lot of ways. But just the way he interacts with the characters, especially because he takes a lot of different forms during the movie, because the whole reason why he wants to get married is so he can get his physical form back. so he can get his physical body back, basically. But so he takes a lot of different forms during the movie. Like when you first see him, he's like this really intimidating Chinese warlord looking guy. And then later on when you see him, he's an old man in a wheelchair. And you see him kind of change forms throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And I think the actor who played him did a really good job just kind of giving him a different personality based on the way he was being portrayed, almost like when he's the warlord type guy, he's very regal almost in a way, like in the way he interacts with the characters. But when he's the old man, he's just very cranky, and he kind of talks in a more down to earth kind of manner.
It kind of reminded me a little bit. I mean, there's a bunch of movies that I felt like it reminded me a little bit of, but again, Labyrinth or Time Bandits kind of had a little bit of that feel with the villain. And there's just a little bit of a Jareth kind of feel, I think, to it seems like an 80s kind of thing to have these sort of over the top kind of fun villains like in this way.
Yeah.
So he was interesting, and kind of kept it feeling sort of fresh and kept it from being boring.
Yeah, like there's that scene where you're in like this mystical, like kind of ancient Chinese decorated room, and then just off to the side outside you see like all this modern computer system and stuff like that. And just when he sees that Kim Cattrall or whoever, a bunch of just Chinese, like a bunch of Wang's friends have shown up to help fight him off. And just the way he talks, like, this just ticks me off to no end. And just things like that. It's like, that made me laugh. Like, that is not the way I would expect that character to express himself in that moment.
It's true. I mean, one thing I appreciate about fantasy films in the 80s is that they all look so different, and they all have like slightly different approaches. You've got this, you've got, again, Time Bandits, you have Princess Bride, you have you have Tron, looking very different. That's more sci-fi, but still, I don't know. It's just really cool that I feel like they really built worlds and really built, they were very creative, and because they had to be. And I feel like with CG, so many of the fantasy films end up looking all the same, and they end up being kind of bland as far as the visuals or just the creativity of like the way the magic is done and the way it feels like I've seen something that looks like this a million times. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's why I was bored with Marvel movies for a long time before Guardians of the Galaxy, basically. Because I felt like all of those looked the same up to Guardians of the Galaxy when they kind of looked at it like, oh, we can do different things and people will still respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. It's true. They're all trying to sort of, for a long time, they were all sort of trying to copy Christopher Nolan, his aesthetic, copy Peter Jackson's aesthetic. But I I don't know. It's just something about when you actually have to build a world, it just is so much more interesting to me as far as, and they do a good job with that here. And it's not like the Lo Pan is like the most interesting. I would say he's not as interesting as the Goblin King in Labyrinth or, some of these other characters, but he works for this story because I don't know. It works for this story because it's all about sort of him leading this whole sort of clan, this whole gang, basically.
Yeah. In a way, I feel like he almost depicts the tone of the movie really well. With kind of in his two personalities, because this is very much a world of fantasy that's kind of smashed into a more down to earth, almost more down to earth kind of world,
Yeah.
And I feel like his two forms of himself are very like they depict that really well. Like the old man in the wheelchair is very much down to earth in the way he talks, in the way he expresses himself. Not quite, but almost. And then the warlord's more like the mystical elements of the movie, like when you see him in that style.
Yeah, that's true. And just the whole sort of bandit, they don't waste time in this movie with like exposition about the curse and what the curse is and all of that. That would be very boring. We don't need to know the ins and outs and the mythology of the curse and where it came from. And we just need to know that there is a curse and here's it is and here's people fighting and here's the bad guy, here's the good guy. That's all you need.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to the point that we made about this movie being really fast-paced. It is very fast-paced, so much so that I had to rewind a couple times because I would miss things, and I'm like, wait a minute, what did they say there, or what happened there, And I think that's because John Carpenter has said that he's very much influenced by Howard Hawks, the director from like the 30s to like the 60s, who was very famous for making fast-paced like comedies and action movies. And people talk really fast in his movies and they overlap each other and things like that. And I think you could see a lot of Howard Hawks' influence in this movie.
Yeah. What do you think of like some of the martial arts sequences?
I think they were depicted pretty well. Like I think the best one is when they crash the wedding, Lo Pan's
that's what I was
wedding.
going to say.
Yeah. And I think the editing in that scene in that part is really, really good.
Yeah.
Just like they really enhance the martial arts moves and things like that.
I agree. That's my favorite too. Also really like when Wong is taking on the guy with the sword.
Oh yeah.
It's pretty soon after that, I think. That was pretty cool.
That was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that's kind of neat, not about the martial arts, but kind of a sidebar about that scene where they crash Lo Pan's wedding. I think that's another scene where you really see Kurt Russell's John Wayne as a buffoon kind of attitude coming out. Because most of that fight, he's not fighting. He gets himself in these really weird situations, or these really goofy situations where he's not able to fight. Like he fires his gun into the ceiling and knocks out the plaster and knocks himself out for half the fight. Or
That's true.
Thrown into that big guy with like, all the armor, and the guy falls on top of him and he can't get out from under him. Just things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's not doing hardly any of the fighting in that big set piece.
Yeah, that's true. Or there's that great scene where he ends up in the wheelchair and he's like leaning back and he has to be like
Yeah.
I like that. That was a fun set piece. That was entertaining. And I feel like this is the kind of movie that like something like Suicide Squad kind of wanted to be, but it just was too messy and it was a mess. But like maybe that one also trying to be a little Ghostbusters, but I don't know, just sort of these sort of scoundrels all kind of fighting and but I don't know, this just has so much more sort of charm and it's just so much more engaging than that. And I like I said, I do think that Kurt Russell is a big reason for that. He's just so fun, and nobody's taking it too seriously. A lot of movies like this that are made now, you have I don't know, people that are taking it very seriously, treating it very reverential in tone, and instead of just having a silly time.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can tell that everybody in this movie is in it just to have fun, you
Yeah.
know? Like, and it feels like they all are having fun through most of the movie anyway.
I feel like I keep talking about other movies, but for some reason that was just my experience watching this film. But another movie that this guy just recently saw it, that this definitely, I wouldn't be surprised if it took some inspiration from, is the first Hellboy movie. It's
Oh,
there's some very similar circumstances in the creature design and the way they I don't know, this sort of the action sequences kind of, I feel like, are somewhat similar.
yeah, I can see that. Like, I haven't seen Hellboy in a long time, but just that whole aesthetic of that movie, as I
Yeah,
remember, is very reminiscent. It looks the same
yeah,
as Big Trouble in Little China does.
right. Yeah, so I don't know, it's really interesting. And what do you think of like the creature design that they have?
I think the creature design is really it's funny. It's cartoony in a lot of ways, which is really kind of unique.
Hmm.
Like when you think of like there's this one monster in particular that I think of. It's just like this big floating orb, basically, and it has like a bunch of eyes and a mouth, basically, is what it is. And whatever it sees, Lopan sees too. And I think of that, and I think that is something that I would expect to see like in an animated TV show or an animated movie or something. It looks like it's animated, but it is, but it's not like animated in like the sense that we think of animation.
Yeah.
And I feel that same way about the what somebody else on another podcast called the Chinese Sasquatch. Basically, this big hairy monster who is the one who actually kidnaps King Cottrell when she stops to look into a secret passage for no good reason whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that one's the most original. It's sort of, he looks sort of like a giant ape kind of type
Yeah,
creature, sort of.
I like how they put so much personality in the face too.
Yeah.
Like you can tell what it's thinking when you look at it. You know.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and you're just trying to figure out how the heck are they going to get out of this, and I kept wondering the whole time. I'm like, is is he really going to make his friend pay the gambling debt
Yeah,
in the beginning of
exactly.
the movie? I wouldn't put it past him.
Exactly. And this movie has a really unique ending, which I think will be fun to talk about
Yeah,
maybe towards the end. Like it doesn't end in the way that a lot of other movies of this kind end. And I think it goes back to kind of that Western archetype. But we'll
yeah.
get
The ending. Well, I mean, we pretty much. I'm trying to think what else that we haven't covered. Um,
oh, one more thing I wanted to mention about the monsters before we move off of that, just really quick.
mhm.
Um, one of the people on that podcast I mentioned earlier, it's called Junk Food Cinema, by the way. One of
Uh-huh.
the guys on there is a screenwriter. He wrote the screenplay for Doctor Strange, in fact. And he was talking about the script for this movie and how almost everything works in this movie perfectly, like script wise. Like it moves really fast, so you
Yeah,
can't really tell that it's structured really well. But almost everything is set up in a way that you don't know something's being set up. Like
yeah,
Incredible catches the bottle at the beginning of the movie after his friend knocks it with a knife. That's setting up the end of the film where the villain meets his demise and things like that. He said that the only things that don't really have a place in the movie are the monsters. He feels like they're just kind of shoehorned
mm,
into the story. And I was thinking, I can kind of see that actually. You
yeah.
know, they
I can
just feel
see
like,
that too. I can see that
yeah,
too. But I'm willing to just have fun with it. Really, really enjoy it.
yeah,
And like I said, I think if they spent longer time with like exposition, but I prefer movies like this or Princess Bride, where like when they're going into in Princess Bride, when they're going into the forest and there's the ROUSs.
uh huh,
All you need is uh, all you need is for they're saying, what about the ROUSs? The rodents of the usual size, and make that's it. You don't need any more explanation about where they are or I think they're
yeah.
that's all you need, and you don't need some big long thing here.
Yeah. And I think it is fun. That makes for a fun experience when you first realize that, hey, wait a minute, there are monsters in this world. Like I said,
Yeah.
that moment when the secret passageway opens and you're like, what's going on? Because then nobody comes out of it at first. And then Kim Cattrall stops to look inside and you see this big old hairy arm grab her and pull her inside. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, that came out of nowhere.
Well, and it also helps when your movie isn't over long when it starts, because now every fantasy movie has to be 3 hours. It's like everything's, or 2.5 to 3 hours, and that starts to try your patience. Something like Warcraft being so long, and or there's just I really think almost every fantasy is super long these days, and so this being basically an hour and a half, it helps so much so that it helps you enjoy the experience a lot more.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, that's part of it being fast paced, also, and
Yeah.
very Howard Hawks like in that way too.
Yeah. Because you don't have all this time to be like, oh, why are they doing this? Who are these monsters? What are these monsters? You're just kind of enjoying it for what it is. And so I agree. Well, let's talk about the ending. And like I said, this is just my my episode for talking about other movies, but I recently saw the Hayao Miyazaki film Lupin the Third. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it though. That's his
Well,
first movie, isn't it?
yes. So
Yeah.
I shouldn't say this because that would be spoiler. But it did make me. There were a couple things that made me think of it in this movie. But the ending is kind of unpredictable, like this movie. Of course, that was released before this, but anyway, I did find that ending kind of refreshing. You've got sort of the rogue character, and he just he could be with Gracie, but instead he hits the open road.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, just one thing really quick, just going back right before that scene, that is Jack's one action hero moment towards the end of the movie. He's the one who gets to kill Lopan at the end of the movie when he catches a knife in midair and throws it back into his head, basically. But
that's true.
But the scene I want to talk about was the one that you were mentioning. Like, that's a scene that, and this is going to sound really funny, but the movie I thought of when we saw the ending was La La Land, actually, because it ends in very much the same way. It's like, aren't you going to kiss the girl? Aren't you going to kiss her? And Kurt Russell looks at her, nope. And it's not that he doesn't like her, it's not.
That's so funny. That was the last movie I was expecting you to talk about. That's hilarious. I mean, like, yeah.
It's like, hey, this ends just like La La Land does.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, except for he doesn't realize that he has the orangutan monster in his trunk.
Yeah, stowing away on his truck at the end.
Yeah. So it is interesting that they never did a sequel to this.
Yeah. Originally, this movie was going to be a sequel to another movie.
Okay.
Because the screenwriter, W.D. Richter, the guy who actually rewrote the original script, the movie he had written and directed just before this was The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. It's like that is a really hard movie to describe. And I haven't seen it. I've just read a lot about it. It's about Buckaroo Banzai is kind of like this Indiana Jones character who is, because he's also he's a professor, like a college professor and a scientist and an adventurer. And he's also a test pilot. And he's also a rock star. He has a band called the Hong Kong Cavaliers. Mm. And he kind of goes on this, I've
never heard of that in my life.
Journey. And this was originally, when he was going to rewrite it, he was originally wanting to make it into a sequel to Buckaroo Banzai, but they decided ultimately not to do that. That would be changing up the story too much,
Yeah. So how do you think that? Do you think this movie is I know we talked about it not being very PC, but are there parts that kind of make you cringe a little bit as far as the portrayal of the Chinese characters?
I think the biggest part that makes me cringe is Wang's Bride is a big part that makes me cringe. You know, like because she literally, like I said, does nothing over the course of the movie. She's either unconscious or she's hypnotized the whole movie, except for like a scene at the beginning and a couple seconds at the end, and it's like, yeah, and that bothers me. But there are a lot of stereotypes in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's except for Wang, and I guess Wang's really the only one that's not a stereotype in the movie, unfortunately. But still,
Yeah, I think I mean it's always a little bit easier this kind of thing when like the white guy is the biggest joke in the room. That sort of helps you give some cushion to things.
yeah,
I feel like that it's not like he's sort of telling them how to live their life, or it's a silly thing for everybody. It's not meant to be taken seriously.
yeah, exactly. And like I said, I think that does cushion the blow that he's not like the white guy who has to come in and rescue everybody. If anything, they're rescuing him throughout the movie as he gets himself into one situation after another. Kurt Russell does, but yeah, I think Wang is probably the one character that's the least stereotypical in the movie when it comes to racial stereotypes. And then
Yeah, I kind of like in his review, Roger Ebert wasn't a huge fan of this movie. He gave it 2.5 stars, but he did say, I think it's interesting that he says, this movie is straight out of the era of Charlie Chan and Fu Manchu, with no apologies and all of the usual stereotypes. If they didn't like The Year of the Dragon, which I guess it came out the previous year, then they're sure to hate this movie. And yet, as we unveil the rehab Statue of Liberty and warm up for the 4th of July, it seems to me The Big Trouble in Little China is just one more example of the way every American ethnic group has been fodder for Hollywood's mill. It may not be true that Chinatowns are honeycombed with subterranean throne rooms, but isn't it kind of fun once in a while to pretend?
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, I think it is too. And like I said, I don't think it's a movie that's trying to be racist, In some ways, you can see some movies that are just really mean-spirited about it almost, And this movie is not trying to offend or trying to make any kind of racial statement at all.
Yeah, and it's just so silly. It's very silly. So I don't know, like you can't take it all that seriously. It's just a fun, silly movie. Yeah. So, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. How would you get out of, if you were going to say 1 to 10, what would you give it?
Probably, maybe like a 7 or so, because I think it is a lot of fun. I don't think it's the best movie in the world. There are things about it that don't work, and I don't even think it's John Carpenter's best movie necessarily. Mm-hmm. That's probably, for me, They Live, which he would make 2 years later. That's his alien invasion movie.
Oh, I haven't heard of that. I thought you were going to say The Thing. That's the one I always hear people talk about with John Carpenter, or Halloween.
See, I haven't seen The Thing yet, but
okay.
But or it might even be Starman, which I've only ever seen part of. That's kind of his sci-fi romantic comedy drama movie.
Huh. So he really has a more range than I thought. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't realize he did all these genres. Yeah. So I think I'd give it the same 7. I think that, I don't know. It depends on, I guess, what you're comparing it to. But yeah, I'd say a 7, 7.5 in that ballpark.
Yeah.
It's like a solid B plus, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's not anything that's going to change your world necessarily. It's definitely not a movie that's going to teach you some crazy life lesson or anything like that. But it's a good, lazy weekend afternoon kind of movie, or a rainy day kind of movie.
And it is totally the kind of movie that you understand why it's got cult status.
Yeah,
Just because
definitely.
everything about it is very that style, kind of movie. And yeah, so it was a fun one to watch. It was a good pick. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that I finally got to check it off my list. Does the fact that if the remake happens, will you be like really nervous about that, or are you open to it?
I don't know.
With The
I'm
Rock?
a really big fan of John Carpenter, so I don't know. Like just for like, I just like his attitude. Like when you watch him in interviews, he has a very nah. I was just making movies for fun kind of attitude. It's very unpretentious, and his
Uh-huh.
movies kind of feel that way too. So maybe I'm protective of it for that reason. Kind of makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But I think The Rock is an intriguing casting choice for Jack Burton.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, like you said, I don't know if he'll be as good as Kurt Russell was in
No.
that role.
The
But
problem with, I mean, it seems kind of funny. You could cast Kurt Russell again. Like, I mean, he
yeah,
was just basically that character in Guardians too.
yeah,
Uh, but the Rock. The only thing about the Rock is that he's usually not mean. You know what I mean? Like he's not like gruff and grizzled, and he's usually pretty nice, right?
yeah. And that's one thing we didn't mention about Jack Burton. He complains all the
Yeah,
time.
he does.
Not in the way that gets annoying though. It's just like no matter what happens, he has some kind of snipey comment to make about everything that's happening.
That's very true. That's very, very true. So anyway, who knows? Right now, The Rock has like 500 announced projects, so who knows if it'll ever happen.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, cool. This was a fun one to talk about, and I'm glad that I finally, like I said, got to check it off my list.
Yes.
Another 80s, and I think that a lot of the 80s fantasy films, a lot of them are held up a little bit because of nostalgia. I mean, I still, like I really do like Labyrinth, and I like Willow, and I like, all these films. But Time Bandits, and I think this one, I think is well, I mean, I had never seen it before, so there's no nostalgia. So
Yeah.
I think that it stands out. It's a fun movie. So it's not one of those ones that I watch and I'm like, what? Why is this in place? What's going
Yeah.
on? So, all right. Well, cool. Well, where can people find you?
Well, kind of. I guess I'm writing in both places right now, which is kind of miraculous for me. But I am a writer, just like Rachel at rotoscopers.com, where we write about animated movies and TV shows and such. And we're actually gearing up for our Halloween countdown right
That's right.
which is kind of on me. So we got to work on that. So stay tuned for that. And then I also write at my own blog, which is vintagevestibule. What is it? WordPress.com. I keep wanting to say Blogspot, but and that's where I write about just everything else that I couldn't write about on Rotoscopers because it wouldn't fit. Comic books, other movies, TV shows, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and we are right in the midst of a DreamWorks countdown right now on Rotoscopers. So you want to check that out every Monday and Friday. We're all of us writers are reviewing the DreamWorks canon. So that's good. That's a lot of fun. And I just posted this week my podcast on Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind. Speaking of really great fantasy films, and I was just blown away by the movie. I saw it as part of Studio Ghibli Fest, and I'd seen it a couple times before, twice I think before, and I liked it, but for some reason just seeing it on the big screen just blew me away. And so me and Stanford had a good time talking about it. So you want to make sure you check out that podcast. And this weekend, it's very exciting. Tomorrow I'm leaving for Denver, and me and my friends are going to see the Frozen musical. So I am so excited about that. It's going to be awesome. They're just doing the test run of it in Denver before it goes to Broadway. So it will be really good. And so that's going to be fun, something to look forward to. And yeah, we have a bunch of fun stuff planned next week. But yeah, so that's basically everything going on. So thanks for joining me on this, and we'll have to talk again soon about another. If you have any ideas for this one isn't really a hidden gem, it's pretty well known, but if you guys in the comments can put any films that you'd like us to talk about, we'd love to hear your suggestions. That would be a lot of fun. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.